Since we're a small group, I hope that we can have more of a conversation instead of a lecture. So please feel free to express yourselves as we're talking today. That would be good. So my name is Nathan Rigner, and I'm here in Iceland as a Fulbright scholar. I'm being hosted jointly by RMF and the University of Acadia. My office is at the University of Iceland, and I have friends here in Holar, and so I feel pretty well connected, yeah, which is great. And I would like to be as connected as possible with you all while I'm here in Iceland. I arrived in January, and I'll be here through August. And so I hope that we have some opportunities to interact and work together. I do want to highlight that my Fulbright is funded by the jointly funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and by the U.S. National Science Foundation's Arctic Research Program. I'm very, very grateful for their support. Okay, so I am a social scientist. My background is in anthropology and sociology. I've been through a forestry program, although I do not know how to identify trees. They're very disappointed in me about that. Then I did my PhD at the University of Vermont in natural resources with a focus pretty strictly on national park and protected area recreation management. I started coming here to Iceland in 2015, in full disclosure, to visit my wife, and she was a Fulbright scholar, and I saw what was happening with tourism to nature sites here, and it just seemed so similar to the kinds of issues and the kinds of phenomena that I saw in national parks in the United States, and I thought, wow. This is a place where I would like to work and get involved. And then I started meeting Icelanders and made some friends. And this being here is the culmination of a long process for me. So, outdoor recreation, nature-based tourism, heritage tourism, whatever you want to call it. I think that there's a lot of commonality. And that these activities are about having experiences that are unique, that are fulfilling, that connect us to landscapes and to stories. And I believe that these experiences are based on a set of resources that require a balance between preservation and protection, and then use within the constraints of those preservation or protection or conservation objectives. And so that's what we're going to talk about here. The basic challenge in all of this, it's the basic carrying capacity challenge. It's the foundational question behind all environmental management. How much use can a place sustain before its quality is degraded to a point that it can no longer sustain this use? So there's an inherent relationship between use levels and quality within this framework. I think we often talk, we're often sort of stuck in a mindset, and empirically it plays out most of the time, that increasing use equals decreasing quality. One of the things I constantly strive to do is find ways to reverse this, where increasing use can actually improve the quality of these places. And so within this relationship, there's a corollary question about what makes for high quality, or how good is good enough. How much this is sometimes expressed in terms of limits of acceptable change. How much change can we tolerate before something goes bad? So this is sort of the core question that I strive to address with my research, and I think about it at three levels. The level of the individual visitor, the experiential level for a person or a group going to these places. What I call the managerial or unit level. This is an area or a place like a park, a national park, think Feller or Vatnajökull National Park, and I think about it sort of at the landscape or system or national scale. So we have individuals, we have the sort of administrative units that we manage, and then we have how those units come together to make up a system or a landscape. And so I want to walk through these 3 levels, share with you my thoughts on how these levels play out and some things that are important to keep in mind when trying to manage for sustainable recreation or sustainable tourism. And then I have 2 research examples, and if we don't have time to talk about both of them, we can have a vote to see which one we'll talk about. Okay, so does anybody here fish? Is anybody here an angler?
Yep.
Okay, I'm not an angler. Have you ever been fishing, not caught fish, and still had a good time?
All the time, and I've always been scolded by my brother.
Yeah.
Because I am supposed to be fishing, not like observing nature.
Well,
Yeah. In there all the time. Yep.
so this was a revelation for me. My mind was blown, right? If you can go fishing, not catch fish, and still have a good time, fishing must be about something more than just catching fish. Hiking must be about more than just putting one foot in front of the other. Seeing the sights must be more than just seeing the sights. And so these 2 researchers, Boltina and Taves, in 1961, made science out of this idea. They were interviewing anglers, and the anglers were coming back at the end of the day saying we had a great day, but we didn't catch any fish. So what's up with this? And what's up with this is that outdoor recreation research started with a focus on activities, but has switched to what I call the behavioral approach. That it's not, when we're thinking about managing for some kind of tourist activity, we shouldn't focus on the activity itself. We should focus on why people are trying to do it, their motivations, and what they're getting out of it. You said to me earlier, one of the main things people want to do when they're touring now is take their Instagram photo, take their selfie and share it. And I think that's because people are motivated to demonstrate to their friends that they're now part of an in-group who has been to a place, and being part of that in-group gives them self-esteem, it gives them status, it gives them recognition within their communities. And so as people engage, this presentation uses examples from sort of wilderness-based recreation and tourism activities. So somebody who hikes might be motivated to be proficient at an activity, to challenge themselves, to escape from their daily lives, to connect intimately with nature. And if they're able to do that successfully, they will increase their self-esteem, they'll be healthy and strong, they'll learn about nature, they'll get some reflection on their daily lives. And so we focus, these individuals are operating at this level of their motivation to achieve certain benefits, and I think that they then pair their activities and the settings they choose to visit to facilitate realizing their motivations and gaining the benefits from their outdoor recreation. This is a very mechanistic process. I do not suggest that somebody gets up in the morning and says, I'm motivated for X, so I'm going to choose Y activity in Z setting, and then I'll get my benefits. These are organic, dynamic, emergent type of experiences, but I think in flowcharts, and my research needs statistical relationships from one box to the next, and so a model like this is helpful for me to conceptualize this process. As a manager, right, a manager of Einar at Thingvellir National Park can't change people's motivations, and he cannot deliver benefits directly to people. What he can do, what are within his powers, are managing the activities and the settings. He can permit certain activities or ban certain activities. He can provide certain types of settings, trails and parking lots, informational signage, or choose not to. So when we're now moving from the individual level to the managerial or unit level, where we have levers at the activity and setting, in the activity and setting zone that we can, look at this, at the activity and setting zone that we can adjust. So, individual visitor level, our goals are to help individuals be satisfied and have experiences that are at least acceptable to them, and that has to do with their motivations and their benefits. And what we, I say we as managers, because most of my research is collaborative with managers designed to be applied. Most of what we as managers can do is address activities and settings. Okay, I was telling the story of J. Allen Wagar. Has anybody here heard of J. Allen Wagar? J. Allen Wagar is like foundational. He's a founding father for me. So J. Allen Wagar in 1964, he was a range scientist, set out to try and figure out what is the carrying capacity of a forest for outdoor recreation. So he started measuring the soils and started measuring the vegetation, and found out that more and more people were coming and nothing was happening to the soils or the vegetation, or at least the soils and vegetation weren't reaching a carrying capacity, yet people were feeling crowded and managers were feeling overworked. And so he was the first person to articulate that a setting, an outdoor recreation or a tourism setting, has more than just an environmental or resource, natural and cultural resource aspect to it. It also has a social and administrative or managerial aspect to it. So we come to this threefold framework. It's very, very like sustainability tripod-like, in that we have natural and cultural resources that we care about. We have the social or experiential part of things that we care about, and we have the managerial or administrative part of things that we care about. And so, as we're trying to figure out what conditions we want for each of these three domains, we need a method to do that. Oftentimes, places like parks have a mission. And that mission is usually expressed in broad narrative terms to preserve the cultural and natural resources unimpaired for future generations, and to provide opportunities for recreation and education. That's great, but that doesn't really give me a way to measure our success. It doesn't clearly define what our true goals for this place are. So I think that we need to take these broad narrative terms of desired conditions and translate them into indicators that are measurable, that are quantifiable, that are sensitive to change, that vary, they go up and down with use levels, and that are synthetic, that take all kinds of elements of an experience or of a place and boil them down into single observable variables. And so we have these indicators, which are proxy variables for our broad narrative objectives, and we need to monitor them. We need to go out and look and say, okay, how are things? What is the condition of this indicator? And then we need some way to judge, right? The condition of the indicator is merely a descriptive variable. It tells us only what is happening. It gives us no information about what ought to be. It makes no prescription for the way a place should be. Is it good or is it bad? For that, we need some expression of a standard or a threshold, a quantitative level, a line that says if our indicator is over this or under this, we go from good to bad. In a limits of acceptable change, Has anybody in here heard of the limits of acceptable change framework? One person. So the limits of acceptable change framework says that we will set a standard for an indicator that is kind of a floor. The indicator can change to this limit, and then we want it to go no further. And so the goal there, I don't like the limits of acceptable change. I think it is bad, because the goal there is to essentially allow that condition to drop to a floor and then just bounce, sort of as bad as it can be and still be good. Which is, for a national park, is not the goal. The goal is to have very good conditions. And so I like models that are more designed about defining a desired condition with our objective and expressing that desired condition in terms of a standard. Okay, so our objectives help us define what quality is. They help us express what our desired conditions are. Indicators are ways to measure, variables to measure the relationship between a use level, number of cars in the parking lot, number of hikers per day on the trail, number of daily arrivals at Keflavik, whatever, some measure of pressure of use against some quality of soil erosion, solitude, noise, whatever our resource is. And it's important that these things be measurable, and it's important that these things be manageable in the sense that we can take action and see change in this variable. But as you can see, there's a whole range on here, right? We can be anywhere along this line, but the question is, where do we want to be along this line? What level is good enough? And that's where our standards of quality come in. And there are many, many standards of quality. Oftentimes when people talk about carrying capacity or a threshold, it's sort of the default assumption is that there's one place, one value, one number along this line. And I disagree with that. I think that there are many places along this line, depending on what we want. If this is the ability to hear, to experience natural quiet. Natural quiet is what I experienced natural quiet out here last night. It's the wind, it's the birds, it's not hearing aircraft overhead. If this is the ability to hear natural quiet and it relates with you somewhere, at a place like Gazer, we might be okay being over here because we recognize that this is a place where there's a lot of use and we want a lot of people to come, and so we're willing to sacrifice some quality, or we're willing to be a place on the quality line here. At another place, I need more low use examples. At another place, somewhere in the Highlands where very few people go, we might want to select a number here. Limits use, increases quality. So there are many places along this line. And so what this does for us is it helps to join together our sort of individual experience with motivations and benefits and the way that activities and settings play into there with how we manage at a unit level by describing our objectives to reflect the motivations and benefits that people have when they visit these places, and then driving those objectives into a quantitative, measurable, manageable system that can be used for monitoring, that can be used for policy, that can be used for infrastructure decision-making, these kinds of things. Everybody with me?
Yep.
Okay. So, we've been through levels 1 and levels 2. And we've alluded to level 3 when we talked about how some places have different, some places we might want high use and certain types of quality conditions, other places we might want low use and other types of conditions. So this is a place in New York State, close to where I live. It's the Paul Smith's Visitor Information Center, and it has a trail network. And this trail network is just about like up here in the Adirondack Park, 2.5 million hectares. And the Adirondack Park is right here in the state of New York. And the state of New York is right here on the continent of North America. And so it's important to recognize that any one place is embedded in a scale both up and down with a system around it. So this is the recreation opportunity spectrum, where as we are deciding what types of opportunities should be available in any one place, we should consider the resources and experiences that we have within our site in comparison to the resources and opportunities that surround us, and I think strive for a system of diversity at many scales. So no one site should feel pressure to provide the full range of opportunities, and every site should focus on what they have to offer that others around them don't. And we can do this, again, using our indicators and standards. So this is the classic recreation opportunity. Anybody heard of the recreation opportunity spectrum? No? Okay, so the recreation opportunity spectrum, another classic from the U.S. Forest Service. In this case, it's arrayed from sort of an urban side of things to a wild side of things. And there is a set of indicators down the left. Social interaction. So how many other people do you see? How frequently do you see them? When and where do you see them? On-site management. What's the level of facilities and buildings, roads, plumbing, these kinds of things? Access, is it easy or difficult? Is it regulated with permits? Is it unregulated? Is there a limit on the number of people? Is the number of people going there unlimited? And then the standards are expressed in terms of ranges for each of these indicators. And the specifics here are not the important part. The important part is that for each of these indicators, we can find a range that is acceptable along a spectrum from urban to wild. So an urban park will have certain types of standards for each indicator. A wild park will have different types of standards for each indicator. And we can do this based on all kinds of different sort of arrays, urban to wild, developed to primitive, busy to quiet. And using a tool like this, we can both understand where our site is within the array of others, and we can ensure that there's diversity across the system. Good? Okay. And so this is what it might look like. These are wilderness opportunities. So let's say that we have 3 different types of wilderness opportunities. In this case, we've got a trail runner, some campers, and some backpackers. Our trail runner is motivated to have physical challenge because they want to feel competent and good about themselves. Our campers are motivated to spend time with friends and family because they want to be connected to those who are close to them. I haven't seen my brother in a long time, so we're going to go camping and we can spend all night talking. Our backpacker wants to be immersed with nature because they want to leave feeling connected to a bigger world and small within it. And so they select a place with a large trail network, with a scenic landscape, and with remote backcountry, respectively, to try and facilitate these experiences. The managers recognize these motivations with an objective to facilitate access for the trail runner. We want to build a lot of trails so that the trail runner can go a lot of places. For our people who want to sort of be in a group together and connect, we want to minimize conflicts with others. And for our backpacker, we want minimal human intrusion. We want minimal levels of development, unobtrusive signage, things like this. Those objectives can be expressed in terms of indicators like the mileage of trail, the state of maintenance. Minimizing conflict is classically expressed in terms of campsite sharing, not having to share campsites. And minimal human intrusion could be the percent time that airplanes are audible, or the percent view shed in which no human development is visible, whatever. And we can express standards for these. We can also array them across a spectrum. Zoning, this is zoning, that's all this is, where we have a transition zone, sort of transition from the urban environment to the wild environment. This is the periphery, so I can get out on my trail run after work easily in a primitive zone or in a pristine zone. So a way to think about how these three frameworks come together to provide a diversity of opportunities that satisfy individuals, that give managers the tools that they need to manage these places within the legal administrative frameworks that we have, and how we can zone a landscape across a setting. Cool? Okay. Ecological example or educational example? Who says ecological? Who says educational? Sorry, eco people. Yeah? Okay, do you want to do both? Okay. Okay. Oh God. Yeah, okay. That's fair. You know where this is?
I don't know, Yosemite?
It's Yosemite Falls.
Oh, wow.
Jess and I spent a summer in Yosemite National Park together. It was good.
Yosemite is nice, I've been there.
Yeah, she's a good roommate.
It's a beautiful place. So 3 people in here have visited this park. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, everyone should visit, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, let's talk about mountain summits. Particularly, so this is going to be a little bit of a funny example for you. Because where I come from in the east, mountain summits are forested. So you spend hours, you're climbing, you're sweating, you're tired, and you get to the top, and you can't see anything, because it's just trees around you. But some mountain summits are not. Some mountain summits are open. So mountain summits are important. They're isolated and confined. You've got these tops of mountains that are spread apart from each other, and that are relatively circumscribed. They're often rare and fragile. They reach up into places where resources are scarce, where it's cold, sometimes where the air is thinner, and the vegetation is both fragile, and oftentimes species live on top of mountaintops that don't live elsewhere. They're also very valuable and popular. These are places that attract people for their scenic and aesthetic values, for their recreational values. This is getting on like 6 or 7 years ago now. Maybe update my pictures. Mountaintops have, recreational mountaintops have multiple objectives for them. We as society, park managers have multiple objectives for these places. One is often to facilitate public access. We build trails to these places. In some cases, we build roads to these places. But we also have objectives to protect the natural resources on top of these places, and to preserve the quality of the classic mountaintop experience of being up there by yourself and looking out over the landscape and reflecting on life. Okay, the Northern Forest, this is Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, Boston is here, New York City is here, Montreal is like here. So this place there's 1.5 million people who live in this sort of stretch of forest. It's within a day's drive probably of 60 or 80 million people. Many of the Northeast cities use this place as primary recreational area. So we were asked to do look at mountain summits across this forest and try and figure out what's the relationship between the way visitors experience these places and the ecological quality of these places. And so we thought, okay, we're going to use the recreation opportunity spectrum. Cadillac Mountain, Acadia National Park, like the 10th most heavily visited national park in the country. Cadillac Mountain, there's a road to the top. Any given day, you're going to get 6,000 or 7,000 people on top of this mountain. Camel's Hump, second tallest mountain in the state of Vermont. About a 7-kilometer hike to the top. Close to a road. Sort of in the fall when the weather's nice, major tourism attraction, but not high use like Cadillac Mountain. Cascade Mountain in the wilderness of the Adirondack Park. It'll take you 12 hours to get there and get back. Much more wilderness experience. So we have our recreation opportunity spectrum there. We did surveys on top of all of these mountains with visitors. Paper-based surveys, asked them all kinds of things. One of the kinds of things we asked them about was their perception of the environment. Is the environment heavily impacted? Is the environment not heavily impacted? Particularly in terms of vegetation loss. Okay, so how's this look? This is a composite photograph of the three mountaintops together. How's it look?
Nice.
Pretty nice, right? -4 to +4.
I think I would get it, and I can
Okay.
down there, the brown thing there.
Yeah,
Is that earth or like?
Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so just
like a business away there.
yeah. -4 to +4. How about this?
That's it?
Where that?
Oh, worse.
See where we're going with this, right? This is the actual mountain. These are more similar to actual conditions. Okay, so we can take the survey responses to these photographs and map them. Went from 90% vegetated in the first photograph to 10% vegetated in the last photograph. -4, totally unacceptable, to +4, this is very acceptable. And we see that when we hit about 50% vegetation, people switch over from saying this place is good to this place is bad. We also can ask visitors, which of these photos is most like what you experienced today? So not just is it good or bad, but what was your experience like?
It's funny if I can just comment.
Yeah.
Because you met Anadora.
Yes.
They did kind of the same things when they were researching for
Power lines.
the lines, the electric lines. And they showed pictures and yeah.
Visual simulations.
Yeah.
Yeah, classic method. Do it with people, numbers of people. How crowded did you feel?
Yeah.
Windmills.
Yeah.
How many windmills are acceptable?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good. I think it's a pretty good method. I think we can improve it, but I think we can talk about how. But I think it's a pretty good method. So we have visitors' perceptions of environmental quality on these mountaintops. We have some information. This could be a standard from visitors. If our indicator is % vegetated, this could be a standard. We could also say that just barely good is not the standard we want. We want like a 2 out of 4. We want pretty good. And so then we could get a standard of like 70% vegetated or something like that. So we asked some environmental scientists including people from Utah State University, to take some measures of vegetation on these mountain summits. And so they went out with 1 meter square and took photographs of like a spatially randomized sample on top of the mountain. Oh, there's the spatially randomized sample on top of the mountain summits. Pulled the squares. Here's our square. Pulled the squares into a software that then sampled points from within that square and coded: is this point vegetation? Is this point rock? Is this point lichen? Is this point bare soil? To get percent ground cover on the mountain summits. And we see that these summits range from between 20% to approximately 45% vegetation. We also, these ecologists also evaluated the trail system using a condition class, a condition class approach, where condition class 1 is a trail with vegetation still live but folded over. A condition class 3 is a trail where organic matter has been removed but no erosion or bedrock is visible. Condition class 4 and condition class 5 are organic matter gone, soil gone, rocks and roots emerging, and extensive erosion. So we see that only 7% is in condition class 1, and more than 50% of the trail is in condition class 3 or worse. So what this tells us, what we get from these results looking across the mountains, is that, let's just look at the top 2 lines first, is that visitors say they typically saw between 60 and 70% vegetation on the summit. Our ecologists measured between 20 and 45% vegetation on the summit. And then when we look at what's acceptable, the minimally acceptable values are between 45 and 47%. So by and large, visitors tell us that they experienced conditions better than they did when measured by ecologists, and that their experience of the conditions is in the good range, and really pretty far in the good range. And part of what motivated this research is an ongoing tension between the way ecologists or resource managers describe these mountain summits as heavily damaged, heavily eroded environments, and the way visitors experience these mountain summits, which is as quite desirable and high-quality recreation destinations. And so the big findings from this study for me were that managers are not visitors. And so if managers are trying to figure out the way visitors think, they should stop thinking about what they think themselves, and that ecological habitat is not equal to recreational habitat. That recreational habitat is a different thing. Question or comment?
2 questions.
Yeah.
It seemed to me that you had like a sort of grid
Mm-hmm.
where you put out the, and the grid, where you take the picture, is you might end up in a bare rock. That's not going to be vegetated anyway.
Yep.
But that's going to be county also.
Yep.
So visitors, I would think that they would say, okay, there's not going to be any vegetation there anyway. So they're just looking at the sites that are really can be vegetated. So I think that's where you have the bias.
Okay.
That's my point. But because they are not looking at the whole landscape and say, this is 30% is bare rock anyway, and that's not going to be vegetated anyway. So I'm just looking at the sites that should have been vegetated. But the other measurement is taking everything. So that's why they're getting less vegetation cover than the other ones, because they're not looking at the same thing. And secondly, I was thinking about the acceptability, because there's not much difference between these sites,
Nope.
It's probably because you don't same, visitors, the ones that go on the cascade are not going to be. These are people that are not as much wilderness people. They accept more, and that's why they are, because it's a more popular site, and they expect more people there. But the other ones that are, the Cadillac site, that wasn't it?
Cadillac is high use, Cascade is low use.
It's all the way around. Sorry, it's supposed to be. When I say that the Cascade, they don't want people there, and they don't. The tolerance for, the tolerance is more the population that goes to the Cadillac. So that's why they have this same sort of, because it's interesting that acceptability is about the same.
Yeah, it is. But they're very different. They're very different people who go to each place, and very different places themselves. Yet there is consistency across these three. So I see this, and I see that people have relatively stable or consistent norms for how much vegetation ought to be on a mountain summit. But yeah, these are all effects to be investigated more, to be dug into more deeply. But I think we do see a difference between what people say they saw, their sort of visual, lived experience of these places, and the measurement. These are the measurements that management decisions are being made on right now, and these measurements, I think, are some ways insensitive to the experience of being in this place.
Because I say that I think that the way that you measure it will be measuring a place where it's not going to be any benefits to cover anyway. It will bother me with this approach.
Yeah. Okay. Hetch Hetchy. Somebody heard of Hetch Hetchy? Yeah, of course. So Hetch Hetchy is the second Yosemite Valley. They're siblings, not far from each other. It means the valley of grass, Hetch Hetchy. This is San Francisco in 1907, I believe. Something like 30% of the city burned in the Great San Francisco Fire. Wooden buildings right next to each other, fire started. No water in San Francisco at the time. The city burned. Do you know who this is? Either of these guys? No? This is John Muir. Teddy Roosevelt. This is Teddy Roosevelt, our president, and this is Gifford Pinchot. Gifford Pinchot was the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service and is credited with really being the first professional forester in the United States. John Muir was the founder of the Sierra Club and is the spiritual father of national parks, spiritual father of national forests, the president who put conservation on the ground in America in between. These two guys were enemies. He was friends with them both. And Teddy Roosevelt was stuck in a tug of war over Hetch Hetchy. San Francisco burned. Gifford Pinchot believed in wise use. John Muir believed in wise use. John Muir said, we cannot dam Hetch Hetchy. Doesn't matter how much we need the water. This place is a cathedral. We should flood our cathedrals and use them as reservoirs and keep Hetch Hetchy free. Gifford Pinchot said, the people need the water. We have Yosemite Valley here. That's protected. Let's dam Hetch Hetchy. Gifford Pinchot won. This is the last dam to have been built in a major dam to have been built in a U.S. national park. He won the battle, but did not win the war. So this place, this is O'Shaughnessy Dam. It fills up the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. There's the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. These cliffs are 1,000 meters, maybe?
When was it built?
The dam was built in 1914, I believe, around like that era. So, this place, you can drive to it. it is a scenic place of importance. It also is a place to tell the story. The story of American conservation history is embodied in the battle over this dam. The tension between John Muir and the preservationists and the national park idea, and Gifford Pinchot and the conservationists and the national forest idea can be told here. And one of the primary missions for the National Park Service, one of their objectives for this place, is for people to be able to learn about this history. Let's look at the video. So this is time-lapse video of users on the dam. We see that we've got a couple of interpretive signs here.
And the guide. Is there a guide?
There might be a ranger. There might be a ranger talk going through this at some point.
And there's a guy with a hat. Looks like he may be a ranger. He's talking to people.
These are our survey administrators up here, by the way. That's what's going on in that corner of things. Okay, so the research question here is the number of visitors, or the density of visitor use on this dam, does it get in the way of people trying to engage with this educational information? Are there too many people visiting this dam for visitors to effectively learn about what's happening here? That's the question. And so there are three elements to this question. One is the management element. How many people are going to the dam, which the park can manage by how many people they allow to this site, the size of the parking lots, the number of buses that they allow to arrive here. There is the perceptual, feeling part of this. Do people feel crowded when they're there? And there is the behavior part of this. Do people actually engage in the educational behaviors or not? And so we use this time-lapse footage to try and figure out what the relationship between these three variables is. Okay, so here's the dam. To give you an idea of where our camera is, it is here. We had some photo simulations, like the mountaintop, with the numbers of people on the dam, and we took some counts of both the number of people on the dam as a whole and the number of people in this little slice of the dam. So our managerial variables are counts of the number of people here, which can be related back to numbers of cars in the parking lot, numbers of people getting off of buses. And we see that there's a relationship between the number of people on the dam and the number of people in the photo area. And then we asked visitors, look at each of these photos and tell us how acceptable was it for you. -4 to +4. We should be familiar with this by this point. We also asked which of these photos is most like what you saw today, and there were more than just these 4. This is a sample of the levels of visitor use that we had in the photos. We also asked people, how crowded did you feel today on a 9-point scale from 1 to 9? And so those were measures of perception of how crowded people felt. What they felt like they experienced today and how crowded did they feel. And then we went into the time-lapse video and measured how long, if you read the sign, how long do you read the sign? This is sort of the depth of engagement. Are you engaging deeply or not? And then we had the percent of groups in which at least one member of the group read the sign. So this is the breadth of engagement with this educational information. Okay, so throughout the day, we see relative stability in the numbers of users. And throughout the day, we see relative stability in the percent of users that read the sign. So these two variables are not really changing much throughout the day. It's steady. So let's look at relationships among these things. And the relationships are, do people feel more crowded when there's more people, when there's more visitors there? So does visitor volume have an effect on feelings of crowding? Does visitor volume have an effect on the way people engage with this information, the number of people who read the sign, or the percent, or the amount of time people spend reading the sign. And then we'll look for a relationship between the feelings of crowding and the actions of crowding. So if people express having felt more crowded, are they more or less likely to read the sign for longer or for shorter? Make sense? Okay. So we see no relationships between numbers of people on the dam, we're in that slice of the dam that was depicted in many photos, and people's feelings of crowding. This is interesting to me. Doesn't matter how many people there actually are, I still feel about the same with my experience. So this is a high-use place, it's a built environment, people don't spend that long there. The experience, the feelings of crowding don't really change with management, but the behaviors do change. So this is the whole dam, and this is the slice of the photo, the slice of the dam that's included in the photo. And we see that as numbers of people in the photo and on the dam increase, the percent of visitors that read the sign decreases. So the more people who are there, not the fewer people read the sign, but less of a percent of the people read the sign. Okay. Duration reading. So what we see here is that as people perceive less use, they read the sign longer. So if I look at the photos, right, we've got photos with 0 people to 100 people. And if I select a photo, if I say a photo with 10 people, I experience conditions that were like this photo with 10 people. I'm more likely to read the sign longer than if I had selected a photo that said, my day was like this one, with 80 people in the photo. Similarly, people who said that they reported feeling crowded, as a greater percentage of visitors read, more of them feel crowded. More visitors feel crowded when a greater percent of others read. So there's a relationship between the percent of people who are reading the sign and feelings of crowding. So as I'm reading the sign and more others are trying to read the sign with me, I feel more crowded. So what we see in this research is that it is not necessarily the feelings of crowding that can be connected to these managerial variables of volume, but it's the behaviors of crowding. The amount of time spent reading the sign and the percent of people who read the sign that respond to this, these management numbers. So as Yosemite National Park is trying to monitor the effectiveness of their objective related to this educational mission, they should focus on engagement with the sign, not in what people say they felt. They should be observing behaviors, not asking people about their experiences. That's the thrust of this work. Thank you.